So let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Elana Sztokman, and this is my sixth session in a series that I'm doing online during Corona on rereading Biblical Women. It's for the purpose of, first of all, a slight distraction. It's something that, during our days of super hyper-vigilant focus on Corona, where we can focus on something else. I know a lot of people are looking for interesting things. So for me, there's nothing more interesting than biblical women. And also, I'm reading Biblical Women in the spirit of bibliotherapy, which is where we look at biblical stories with an eye towards helping them read our own lives. And I thought this could be really useful for us right now. And it's a way for us to draw both insights and inspiration and tools of reading women's lives and thinking about how we experience our own lives. Even though they didn't have Corona back then, they had other things, all kinds of challenges, and reading how other people experience their challenges could sometimes provide us with our own insights or tools or just ideas, or perhaps none of that. And if it's none of that, that's okay too. Okay, so I'm going in order of the Tanakh, of the Bible, and we've done so far the story of Eve, the story of Sarah and Hagar, the story of Rebecca, the story of Rachel and Leah, the story of Dinah. And tonight, the next story up is the story of Judah and Tamar, which is a story actually that a lot of people who graduate religious schools complain that they never actually read properly. So whether or not you've ever read the story or have read it as an adult or in other contexts, we're just going to read it. And the approach through this sort of it's feminist bibliotherapy, what we're doing, and the approach is very much to just read the story without going too much into midrashim here and there, but just to read it with our own eyes, without any mediation, just to read it with our own eyes and our own hearts. Okay, so we're looking at Genesis chapter 38. So I'm going to share the screen with you. The site that I'm using is the Chabad Bible site because they have a very easy to read Hebrew and English translation, the English translation side by side, so it's very easy to follow. I'm going to place the link in the chat so you can link to it yourself. And let's put that in the chat. So you can see it's on Chabad.org. But also share the screen so that you should be able to see the screen that I'm looking at. Okay. Hang on. Here's my screen. Here we go. Okay. Can you all see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So just to put this story into context, in the previous chapter was the story of Joseph's brothers, where they sold him. Or they might not have sold him, where they threw him into a ditch, and then he was sold to merchants going down to Egypt. It's a terrible story. It is one of the most terrible stories. We have a lot of terrible stories actually in Genesis, but this was a particularly heartbreaking story of 11 brothers ganging up, or 10 brothers ganging up on another brother to the extent of trying to get rid of him in whatever way they could. And what's significant in the story, in terms of where it comes down to the Judah and Tamar story, is that Judah played a starring role there. And Yehuda's starring role in the way the story is told is that somewhere towards the end of the deed, Yehuda was it seems like Yehuda was trying to save his brother. It's a little bit unclear. There are a lot of details in the story that are fuzzy.
Dr. Sherry? Hi. Yeah. Here we go. Hi, how are you? Well, thanks. This is Special Agent Mary Beaver.
And someone,
yeah. Thanks for letting us come out.
Okay, sorry, I just wanted to get rid of background noise. I put you all on mute because I wasn't sure where all that background noise was coming from. Okay, so in the previous chapter, we see this really terrible story of brothers doing this awful thing to one of their brothers. And the story is trying to show Yehuda in a slightly different light. Yehuda and Reuven were both sort of trying maybe to save their brother. It didn't work. And now, straight afterwards, the first thing we see is this chapter, which begins with, around that time, Judah went down from his brothers, which the Chabad gives a sort of problematic translation, which is an interpretation which says he was demoted by his brothers. But there really is no indication in the Hebrew that he was actually demoted, because demoted implies a passive verb, that something happened to him. Whereas in the Hebrew, he is the one who chose to go down. And also, what does down mean? Like, clearly the implication of going down is negative. He did something that implied, distancing and distancing down. But we don't know exactly what that means. The point, though, is that we have to figure out why this is here right after the previous chapter. So clearly the story that we're about to read wants to say something about Yehuda and his process, whether it's a personal, spiritual process, an emotional process, political process. He's going through something here. Okay, so let's take a look at what he did. During this time, and also because it says during this time, clearly the text wants to connect it to this period of the aftermath of Yosef, which we can only imagine, where Yaakov was in mourning, where the brothers were broken, with a whole dream of having an Am Yisrael, of having a whole, family to gather the blessing, God's blessing, where that was very broken. So we're in a dysfunctional time. Okay, so Yehuda goes down from his brothers, and he went to an Adulamite man. What's the significance of Adulami? The significance is that he wasn't a Israeli, okay? In the sense that one of the most important aspects of creating the Israelites, of creating Bnei Israel, creating that whole blessed nation, is that you stay with your clan. And throughout Genesis, every time somebody left the clan, they were, it was a sign of something going wrong. So here, the fact that he was leaving his people is not something that Genesis would be looking at favorably. Okay, and what happened next? Vayasham Yehuda bat ish Knaani ushmo Shua vayikacher vayavo eleh. And he marries a Canaanite, which is the thing that the Israelite men are not supposed to do. The most important thing for an Israelite man is to marry an Israelite woman. So here we see that Yehuda is veering far. He's marrying a Canaanite. Okay. So what happens? He has a baby. His first name is Er. And he's not finished yet. He's still going. The second one, Onan. He has another baby, another son, and the woman is named Vatikra. She is naming all of them, which is also significant. She herself doesn't yet have a name. She's just the daughter of an Adulami, of a Canaanite. She's a Canaanite woman who doesn't have a name, but she's here naming the children. Okay, and he's in a place called Kiziv. Now, years pass. Between verse 5 and verse 6, years pass. How do we know years passed? Because it says, Vayikach Yehuda isha le'er b'charo, he is marrying his son off. We don't know anything about what happened in between the time that he had 3 children, his wife gave birth to 3 children, and now he's marrying the first one off. But even if we're going to say that they got married at 11 or 12 or 13, there was still a certain period that passed. So he's been gone for a long time. Okay, so now, he takes a woman for his eldest child, and her name is Tamar. Thank God she has a name. It's always a plus when women are named in the Bible, because there are many, many women who are unnamed. Okay. Now, the facts of the story are that died. Okay, died. But this phrasing of that he was bad in God's eyes, this is not typical Bereshit Genesis language. Does it remind you of anything? Does this if any of you have any background in Bible studies, does that language remind you of anything? That he was bad in the eyes of God? It's very prophetic. It sounds very much like the language used during the kings, during the period of the kings, during the judges and the kings. That's the language that's used there when the Jewish people were building a nation, building a land, a country. There would be a king, there would be a good judge and a bad judge, and this language of this king or this judge, and so bad things happened. It's much more judgy language than we're used to here. And that, I think, might be significant. But we'll come back to that. I'm planting a seed. Okay. So, died because, according to the text, he was bad. So God killed him. So, he says to the second brother, go marry your sister-in-law, your dead brother's wife. That's a commandment called Yibum, which exists in the Torah, which says that if a man dies before he has children, his brother has to marry his widow in order to keep his brother's line alive, the brother's lineage alive. And then if they have a child, that child is part of the dead brother's lineage. Okay, it's a way of talking about giving birth as lineage and keeping memory alive. Zachar, like the idea of a Zachar is a Zecher. If you have a son, that's your lineage, that's your legacy, is that you have a son. Okay, so that's biblical thinking. It's not that different from traditional thinking even today, even though Yibum isn't really practiced anymore. But the concept of having children in order to keep your line alive still does exist. Anyway, so Yehuda went to the second son and said, marry your brother's wife so that you can have a zera for your brother's seed, legacy can be kept alive. So, so he knew that if he did this, any child he would have would be considered his brother's and not his. So he shichet arza, which means that he wasted his semen. He splashed his semen on the ground. Okay, so that his wife so that Tamar could not get pregnant. It's really quite graphic, actually. A lot of information. Okay, so God doesn't like this. So God did not like this, so he killed the second brother also. And now we have Yehuda finally stepping in here. Yehuda has not been a very active person in this chapter, other than that he's getting married and marrying off his children, but we don't hear him speaking about anything. All we know is he's going down. It sort of is reminiscent a little bit of Yonah, right? Yonah also talks about Jonah descended into the boat, into the bottom of the boat. It's almost like an emotional descent. So Yehuda went to this emotional descent of escaping and creating a life far, far away from his brothers and his family. And he's not wanting to interact much with anyone. Until now, verse 11, Yud Aleph, where finally he says something. And when he chooses to speak, what does he say? Vayomer Yehuda la Tamar kalato, shvi almana beit avich ad yigdal shela bani, ki amar pen yamut gam hu ke'echav. He says, I don't really want my third son marrying you right now. Let's give this, let me at least have my son for a while. It's almost as if Yehuda is convinced that his son is gonna die as soon as he marries her. This is like the original Black Widow story. So he says, so what does he do to Tamar? He says to Tamar, go back to your father, which is basically saying like he doesn't want her anymore. He's getting rid of her. He's blaming her basically for the fact that his sons are dying. He's not saying because my sons were bad. He's saying because Tamar is cursed or something like that. So, so many years passed. Years, days, time passed. Vatamat Batshua eshet Yehuda, and Batshua, his wife, died. So now Yehuda has lost his two out of 3 sons. He sends his daughter-in-law back, and his wife died. And by the way, he didn't bring Tamar back as these days passed. So, okay. So, Vayinachem Yehuda, so in order to console himself, Vayal al gozezei tzono, hu b'chira re'ehu adulami timnata. He went on a sort of camping trip with his buddy, with chira re'ehu. He sought out a male friend, an adulami, and they took a trip to a place called Timnah to be with the sheep. Okay, he went, and that was comforting for him to be alone with his buddy and the sheep. Vayugad Tamar lemor, but Tamar, for some reason, heard about this. It doesn't say who told her. It doesn't say why they told her. It just says in this passive voice, Vayugad Tamar lemor, hine chamecha ole timnata legosono. They said, your father-in-law is coming to Timnah to graze the sheep. So what did she do? Vatasa bigdei almenuta me'aleha. So she took off her widow's garb, which tells us what? It tells us that she's been wearing the widow's garb all along. Many years have passed. A long time has passed, and she is still misumenet. She's still signal. She's still signal. It's like a scarlet letter. The bigdei almanut, the widow's garb. She has been designated as the widow all of this time, which is where she is stuck. Okay, she can't marry anybody because she's supposed to be marrying the third son. She still belongs to Yehuda's family. She's supposed to be keeping alive those brothers' legacies. She can't marry anybody else. So she's stuck. It's almost like a form of being an agunai, of being a chained woman in a certain way. She's chained to this family, and Yehuda totally kept her stuck and didn't care for her thoughts. So here, when she hears that Yehuda is coming her way, she takes off the widow's garb, vatichas b'tzaif vatit alaf, and she covered herself with a scarf. Vateshet b'petach einaim. She sat in some kind of crossroads on the Timnah road. Because she realized that, wow, Shelah, the third son, has gotten big. He had promised her, remember, Yehuda promised her and said, oh, when Shelah gets big, we'll invite you back. When we, the readers, knew that he was never going to invite her back because we knew that he was afraid that she was going to kill the third son. So now she's sort of waking up and realizing like, oh, she is forever stuck. So she is taking her life into her hands. Okay, she's saying, I have to do something about this. So this is really interesting because, we still have modern day agunot. And actually this Yibum story also exists in some corners also, although it's fairly rare. But the aguna issue is really not rare at all, where women are stuck in marriages that no longer exist and nobody's looking after them. So there are a lot of parallels between that story and this story. So here she is, she's going to do something about this. Vayira'eh Yehuda. So Yehuda saw her. Vayachsheveha lizona ki kista paneha. And what's Yehuda's first thought about her? a woman on the road with a covered face, he assumes that she's a prostitute, okay, which tells us a lot about women in those days, which is that women were expected to be inside, which also explains the Dinah story that we recently read, which is where Dinah was punished in a certain way for daring to go out by herself. It's like, what kind of woman or girl goes out by herself? It's the same sort of punishment here where, you know, like, oh, she dared to go stand on the road, therefore she must be a prostitute. Okay, so this really gives us a very stark portrait of women's lives. And what I shared in the previous session when we talked about Dinah was that I grew up this way too. I grew up with the idea that women did not go out alone at night, ever, ever, ever. I was like married with 3 kids in my late 20s before I felt like, oh, okay, I could go out by myself. I could travel by myself. I could do what I want by myself. I was brought up very much in this, you know, the darkness falls and you lock your doors and you don't go out. And if you do have to go out, you make sure that you go with a man. I'm just telling you, that is how I was brought up. And it took me a lot of work on myself to realize that maybe that's wrong. Okay, but of course I also grew up in New York. So it could also be that like crime and safety issues were different then. Never mind. Okay. Vayomer. Okay. So sorry. Verse 16. Vayet Elah el haderech. Okay. So he likes this. He sees a prostitute. His wife just died. It doesn't seem to matter. He goes to her and he says, Hava navo elech ki lo yada ki kalatohi. So he goes to her and he says, let me be with you, because he did not know that she's his daughter-in-law. And she says, well, you have to give me something, right? So she's playing along with the idea that she is a prostitute. Okay, so he says, okay, I'll give you, you know, one of the sheep, or not a sheep, a goat. And she says, I need some kind of collateral. Eravon is like a collateral. What collateral do you want? She chose 3 things that, again, we're getting a really vivid portrait about how things worked back then. She chose 3 things that were unique to him. The first thing she chose is a hotemet, okay, which is some kind of stamp, okay, which is like a signature. Upsilcha, upsil is a thread, your threads, so literally your threads, which is, you know, your coat, umatcha, and your staff, asher biyadecha. And he didn't think twice. He gave it to her, and he came to her, and they slept together, and she became pregnant. So she didn't tell him that she was pregnant, obviously, because in verse 19, she gets up, bataka, batelech, vataser tzifa me'alav, vatilbash b'gdei almanotah. She got up. The order of things is a little bit unclear. Did she get up after she knew she was pregnant or before? She took off her harlot's outfit and put back on her widow's outfit. And then, Vayishlach Yehuda et gdei ezim b'yad ra'eh adulami lakav teravon miyad isha v'lo mitza'ah. Yehuda said, okay, I need to go get my stuff back from this woman. After he finished with his, you know, going out in the field to spend some time alone with his friend and his sheep, he says, okay, I got to go back home, go back to normal life. I need to get back my 3 things that I left this woman and couldn't find her. And then he goes around to the town and he says, where is that Kadesha, that prostitute who was on the road? And they said, we've never had a prostitute in this town. So people went back to Yehuda in verse 22 and said, we didn't find her. Then the people in the town said, there was no such woman. Vayoma Yehuda, verse 23. He says, we better find her, okay? We really have to find her, because otherwise we're going to be shamed. He was worried about being shamed. but they didn't find her. So 3 months pass. Verse 24. Vayehi kemishalash chodashim vayugad Yehuda lemor zanta Tamar kalatecha. Suddenly the word gets back to Yehuda, that daughter-in-law of yours, she's pregnant. The one who's not married to anyone at the moment, she's pregnant. Which of course, that's the worst thing that could ever happen, is for his daughter-in-law to get pregnant by someone else. She's supposed to be saving her womb for his dead sons. So Vayom Yehuda hotziua vatisaref. He doesn't blink, and he says, "Take her out to be burned like a witch." Okay, this is 3,000 years ago, and this was what happened 3,000 years ago. It was also happening 300 years ago. Okay, bring her out and let her be burned. It's a little bit also reminiscent of the whole Scarlet Letter story. There are a lot of similarities also. This is women's fate for so long in so many cultures. Okay, whereas, he doesn't face anything. He does not face any consequences for the act that they did. He doesn't face any consequences for the fact that he just abandoned her. But she who was completely stuck and living for years in this stuckness, and also, by the way, who buried 2 husbands, she's burned, she's punished. Okay, so the double standard here is really quite jarring. So she's about to be taken out to be burned. He mutzet, she's taken out. You want to know who I'm pregnant by? It's the person who these 3 items belong to. Tell my father-in-law that whoever owns these 3 items that I have, he's the father of this child. Find out who this stamp, this cloak, and this staff belong to. Vayaker Yehuda, and Yehuda recognized it right away. Vayomer tzadka mimeni. She is right. He says tzadka mimeni, meaning she is more right. She's more right than I am. Ki al ken lo netatea l'shela b'ni v'lo yasaf od datea. She is right. I was supposed to give her to my 3rd son, and I didn't let that happen. Okay, so this is really, after everything that Yehuda has been through, his descent, suddenly this act of Tamar saying, "Look what you did," pulls him out of it. It brings Yehuda back to humanity in a way. Instead of like descending and going far away, suddenly he's like waking up. And he's waking up to his own morality or immorality, his own actions. So it's a beautiful story in some way, in that like the rabbis use this story as like, oh, well, you see, she made him righteous again, and a lot of times like women are given this mission. A lot of times, even from the time that girls are like in kindergarten, where it's like, oh, well, there are boys who are misbehaving, so we're going to put the boy next to a girl, and the girl will straighten him out. And, women are sometimes told to get married that way or to stay married that way. Like, oh, the woman will straighten him out. And, Tamar is held up as the woman who was able to straighten out the guy who was off his path, kind of thing. So on the one hand, yes, kol hakavod, good for you, Tamar. On the other hand, that's quite unfair. It's quite unfair. And actually, you see kindergarten teachers do this all the time, where they'll seat kids, they'll do like boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, girl on purpose, because they're like, oh, well, when the boys are together, they're wild. But if you place a girl in the middle of 2 boys, then the boys will be like less wild. And then it's up to like the girl to be sitting in between 2 boys who are allowed to misbehave. And the girl's job is to show them how to be sweet. So, that idea here of like what a woman's job is vis-a-vis men, that it's like women's responsibility, like it's our responsibility. Or like also, how does this idea also find expression in the whole idea of tzniut, of modest dress? Like, what is the concept of modest dress? The concept of modest dress is that men are wild, men cannot control their sexuality. And so it's up to women to be virtuous, so super duper virtuous, much, much more virtuous than men. And, it's our responsibility to keep men from, being too wild. And if we don't do that, if we wear, clothing that's not modest enough or not covering enough, then it's like, oh, well, it's women's fault if men, men can't control themselves then, like that. And it's not just in religious circles, this idea also is part of rape culture in general, rape culture where, if a woman is raped and well, what was she wearing? He can't control himself if she's wearing a certain thing or she's behaving a certain way, kind of thing. So this verse here in 26 where it says, Tzadkami many, like, oh, yeah, she's right. She brought me back. She has shown me the correct path. That's a very, very charged concept that has lasted 3,000 years. Okay, the last bit of the story is quite, hang on, before we go to this last bit, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. Does anybody here have any comments that they want to share here about things that I said? Paul, are you trying to say something?
Wait.
I can hear you. We hear you. Okay, I unmuted you.
No, I think it's going to come up in the next part. I mean, I've always found this story interesting because of how the descendants of this illegal match end up turning out.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in 1 second. What are your thoughts? You can jump ahead for a second. What are your thoughts, Paula?
Well, I never thought about the whole thing about how Tamar is set up to be Judah's redemption.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really interesting thought.
Vardy, Barbara, did you want to share any thoughts? Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to the end of the chapter. Okay, because it's sort of an epilogue, but maybe it's the whole point. Because that's how like a lot of the biblical stories work that way, that the end of the story tells you what the entire purpose of the story was. Okay, so verse 27. She's having twins. Genesis loves twins. We have a lot of situations of twins or brothers. Right, we had Cain and Hevel. We had Ishmael and Yitzchak, who were not twins, but they were in competition with each other. We have Yaakov and Esav, who are Tu'umim and Bimina. And then, of course, we have the story of Rachel and Leah, who were not twins, but sisters, so to the extent that one was able to take the other's place in bed with a man. Okay, so there are a lot of stories here about two siblings. And then, of course, later on, we also have the story of Yosef's sons, Ephraim and Menashe, also two brothers who were like in competition with each other. So this is a recurring theme. Even though V'hinei Tu'umim B'bitna is particularly reminiscent of Yaakov and Esav, and of these, the whole lifelong competition over who was going to be the Bechor, who was going to be first, because it was the same language. Tu'umim B'bitna, that's how it was described with Rivka. Okay, so. So something very strange happened during the birth, which is that the first baby to come out stuck a hand out. So the midwife, who was obviously very, very concerned about knowing who was going to be the actual Bechor, took a red bendel, a red shani, a red thread, and wrapped it around the hand that came out. In the middle of birth, that's what she was super important. So that everybody would know Zayatza Rishona. But then Vayihi Kameshiv Yado, the baby put his hand back inside. And instead, the brother, the other one came out first. So just very similar to the whole Yaakov and Esav story about fighting from the womb about who's going to come out first. Here too, we have the fighting in the womb over who's going to come out first. Vatomer, ma paratz talecha. Paratz vayikra shmo paratz. So because he was paratz, he burst forth first. He broke through, which, oh my God, you're just like feeling for this woman giving birth to a kid who is poretz, who is, breaking through, and it's like, oh my God. Okay, clearly this was not written by a woman giving birth. Among the many stories where the recurrent theme of all of these stories about the women is that the stories were not written from a woman's perspective in any of the cases. It was never, the stories are never actually about the women. Even the Rachel and Leah story was not really about the women. So here too, it's just another example of not really being about the woman. And then, of course, the shani, the red thread was on his hand. He came out second, and his name was Zerach, which is like a zucha, which is like a sunrise, which is much more pleasant than paratz, which is breaking through. Okay, so it's a very, very specific and detailed story about the birth of these two grandsons. And you really have to ask yourself, like, why? But I think once you start thinking about all of these stories in Genesis with the brothers and with the competition over who's going to be first, and hear this story about who's going to be first, you realize that that is pretty much the theme of all of Genesis. All of Genesis can be boiled down. All of Genesis can be boiled down on some level to a fight over the Bechorah, a fight over who was going to get this Bechorah. Because the Bechorah, Bechorah is supposed to be the firstborn, and it's supposed to be the one who gets this blessing. Now, it was the whole point of Genesis is to create an Israelite nation that receives God's special blessing, that has a special mission in this world, a special moral, spiritual mission, and all of these blessings, to be the chosen or whatever. So all of Genesis is about trying to create that family, trying to create the family that was going to carry on this mission. But over and over again, the person carrying out the mission is not the firstborn. So for instance, Ishmael was older than Isaac, but God kept saying to Abraham, it's not Ishmael who's going to carry on the blessing, it's Isaac, the secondborn. He's the one. Same thing with the story of Esav and Yaakov, where Esav was the Bechor, he's the firstborn, but Yaakov grabbed that. Now, whether he should have, whether he deserved it, and all of that is a huge question. We talked about that when we had the session on Rebecca, about how Rebecca manipulated all this and why did she manipulate it. But the bottom line of the story is that it's not the firstborn who becomes the Bechor. It's not the firstborn, it's a reversal. You have the same thing with the story of Ephraim and Manasseh, the children of Yosef. We haven't got to that story, that's a few chapters down. But there's a whole story with Ephraim and Manasseh where Yaakov crosses his hands to reverse the blessings because he gives the younger one the Bechor. In other words, this is the recurrent theme. The same thing with Rachel and Leah, where the younger daughter is being married off first, and she's going to be the one who carries on the blessing. And Lavan says, no, that's not how we do things. But it was the way Yaakov wanted to do things. Yaakov wanted the younger one. He always, throughout his life, Yaakov thought the younger sister was the special one. That's why Yaakov preferred Yosef. He wanted Yosef to be his special one. He gave Yosef the Kuton and Hapasim. He gave Yosef the special status. And all of that tension between the brothers was about this, was about who gets the special status. So one of the things that I've been saying throughout the course is that, a big life lesson for us is that we should not do this as parents. As parents, we should not, our big life lesson should be not to play favorites, not to choose one of our children over the other, because so much pain and so much tragedy appears in Genesis over the choosing of one child over another. But here we also see a very particular message. in this story, which is sort of like almost a side story, like what is the point of this story about Yehuda? Why is this such an important story? And so I think part of it has to do with the fact that it's reinforcing the message of basically the underdog, right? That it's not the firstborn who gets the bechor, it's the underdog. It's not the firstborn. It's not the natural, the expected bechor who's getting that status. It's someone else. Now, why is that so important? Because history is written by the victors, and at the end of the day, this entire story in Genesis is here to prove a particular political point that will only happen later on in the time of kings. Okay, because I mentioned earlier on that some of this language here at the beginning of this chapter about they were not liked by God or whatever, that's very it's language that is adopted from the days of the kings. When what was happening in the times of the kings, there was a competition between Yehuda and Israel. There was a competition between the descendants of Judah, who we are now. We are all Jews, Judahs. We are all descendants of 2 tribes of Judah, and the other 10 tribes. That was what we saw a chapter ago with Joseph and his brothers, with this breakup, this split between brothers. That's going to carry out for many generations and hundreds of years. And today, we're living that out, right? We're living out the reality that the only brother really to survive was Judah, the one who took over and survived, and who where we are today is Judah. So history is written by the victors. This story is here, in my opinion, to prove Judah's worth, especially after the previous chapter with Joseph and his brothers. What was the tension in Joseph and his brothers? There are 2 sets of tensions. One tension is between Reuven and Yosef, okay, about who is the bechor. Because Yaakov thinks that Yosef is the bechor because he thinks that Rachel is his favorite, and Yosef is the firstborn to his favorite wife. So Yosef is the bechor. But Leah and probably Lavan and Reuven all think that Reuven is the bechor because he is the firstborn of all of Jacob's children, of all Yaakov's children. So when Yosef comes with all of his dreams and says, hey, I'm going to be king and all of that, all of Leah's children rebel. They're all like, who is this guy? He's reversing everything. It's all wrong. He's not supposed to be the bechor. Reuven is supposed to be the bechor. So that's one set of tensions. But another set of tensions that comes out in the story about Yosef and his brothers is a tension between Reuven and Yehuda. And Reuven and Yehuda were the 2 brothers who were trying to save Yosef from being sold, being thrown in a pit or killed. And both of them failed. But the text is trying to show Yehuda as the true leader. And so straight after that story that we have of the 12 brothers, now we have the story of Yehuda. I'm like, oh, what happened to Yehuda? He went off the deep end for a while, but then, he got pulled back in, and then he realized, he's part of this family. And he's so much so that he had his own twin story about the younger brother taking over the older brother, which is the quintessential Israelite story from Genesis to show that it's the underdog who's the real leader. Why? Because Yehuda is the real leader. As if to say, Yehuda wasn't meant to be the bechor. He's that underdog who had the real virtue, that the blessing doesn't just go to the person who's born first, the blessing goes to the one who is the most deserving. And so this whole story is here to prove Judah's virtuousness. He wasn't the firstborn, but he was the one most deserving to be the bechor. And that's why hundreds of years later, thousands of years later, it's Judah who will be the true leader, who will survive the Jewish people. So that feels like the purpose of the story. So the story really isn't even about Tamar, other than it's about Tamar being the virtuous vehicle through which Yehuda is able to, see how he erred in his ways, which, by the way, is also reminiscent of what's going to happen to his descendant David, right? The way Yehuda very quickly says, Tzadkani meni, like, oh, she's right, is very similar to the way David realizes his own mistake after he, rapes Bathsheba and then takes her for wife and sends her husband to war and has her husband killed, right? And then so Natan Navi comes to him and says, "You've done a terrible thing," and David says, "Khatati." Very quickly, very similar personality, or the text is trying to show us a very similar personality. The personality who very quickly says, "Oh, I've been shown the error of my ways," right? So just like Tamar was the vehicle for Yehuda to come back to his path, Bathsheba was the vehicle for David to come. So here we have women being instruments. We're instruments because we have some kind of, greater sense of virtue or whatever the text is trying to say here. We're not actual people. In other words, in this story of Tamar is not a real person. We don't know how she feels about anything other than possibly we think that she might realize that she's been wronged, that when she realizes, oh, he's never going to send me to marry his third child, is he? And that's when she decides. But we don't have Tamar really before then. And then obviously after that, she has a lot of agency. She has a lot of creativity. She has a lot of power, and a lot of courage. She's very courageous what she did. She broke all conventions, totally broke all conventions. She had been walking around with that scarlet letter and the widow's clothing. She broke all conventions and went and turned herself into a harlot and then forced Yehuda to own what he did. So she was super courageous, okay? But the story is still not really about her. The story is about Yehuda, as we see in the end, that the purpose is to show Yehuda as the one who's most deserving to be the chosen one. What are your thoughts? Anybody want to comment? Paula, you wanted to share something before about the descendants? Hang on, let's put you on. Hang on. Okay, go ahead.
If you look at the descendants of Judah, can you pull up the text again?
Please. Yep.
Who are the descendants of their match? Perez.
Whoops, hang on. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and who does Perez go and end up becoming a descendant of, or antecedent of?
Yeah. Well, eventually they become the Davidic line.
Exactly.
They end up being the Davidic line. Yeah.
And the other descendants come from Lot's daughters. And I always think it's interesting that the Mashiach, the line of the Mashiach, comes from these sexually ambiguous relationships. And I've always thought that's just, to me, that's just been the whole fascination of the story is, I think your take on it, that it's about Judah and really Judah's redemption, is a really interesting concept. But I also find that it's really interesting that it's through these illicit sexual relationships that the Mashiach comes.
Right, and there's also the story of Ruth and Boaz is a illicit relationship, which is very
because the descendants of Lot's daughters and the descendants of Tamar and Judah end up creating Boaz's lineage.
Right. Well, that's it, because Ruth was a descendant of Moab, who was a descendant of Lot and his daughter. Right.
So I just find that, to me, that's one of the interesting things about the story. The other thing I find interesting about the story in general is that they talk about it's a really tiny little fact that it talks about Judah going out with the sheep shearers. And the fact that they were industrial enough to have people who were the sheep shearers to go out with a side point of the whole story, that we can really look at their society through this light, and that, there was a road for a prostitute, and there was a road for the sheep shearers, and there was everybody, it was a quite advanced set of societal structures, and how Tamar worked within that structure to set up the situation, which is just one of the things that I find really interesting, women know how to do that. We know how to work within structures.
Right.
Even if they're strict and complicated, find the way to get what you need to get done. And Tamar does that.
Right. We talked about that a lot with Rebecca. Rebecca was very industrious. She was the one who like manipulated everything behind the scenes. And even from the time that she was a girl, also when she was feeding the camels, like she was working from within her system. Sarah also, when we talked about the Sarah and Hagar story, Sarah also had to find her power from within very strict patriarchal norms. And so living within that patriarchy, she also tried to manipulate things to go her way, and it ended very badly. Yeah. Anybody else?
Hey, I'm sorry, I need to leave.
Yeah, we're going to stop
thank
now.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you to all of you who are here and for the conversation.
Thank you.
And feel good. Stay well.
Thank you. Stay well.
Stay well. Bye.